this video is going to be a pretty different vibe for the channel. I would consider the vast majority of videos on this channel to be answering a question of how. Whether it's my demos and my reviews, how does this thing sound? How does it fit into a signal chain? How does it fit into certain genre touch points? Or my studio work that I've done over the last year or so, these kind of like drum and bass tutorials, mixing tutorials, tips and tricks on how to level up your home recording or your demos. It's still answering a question of how. But today instead I want to answer a question of why. And what I mean by that is why, if I can do this, you can too. Why it's possible for you in your home studio to do exactly what I do here. Let me explain. You are seeing right now a pretty cinematic widescreen shot. You are seeing what hopefully appears to be pretty good looking lighting, good audio quality. You saw kind of great shots of the guitar you can see in the background right now, well manicured and well framed shot of gear and all of that stuff. I put a lot of work into making this channel look good, making my channel and my home studio look very professional. And I know it works because I get a lot of comments and questions from people in YouTube videos, on my Discord server that is accessible to my Patreon supporters. I mean, hell, I have these conversations with other demo artists, YouTubers, musicians, even guys who work on the other side of the industry. Friends of mine who are like A&R for bigger pedal companies and guitar companies talking to me and asking me questions about the nature of my home studio and kind of the space that I work in. And a lot of those conversations are born out of that idea of like, man, if only I had the kind of space that you have, I would be making more stuff. And so today I want to kind of pull back that curtain a little bit. And the grand irony is this room actually does have a curtain in it. So let's just go ahead and zoom out this camera really quick. This is the whole of my home studio. This is basically the entire width of the space I am working in right now. Let's go ahead and do a very, very down and dirty studio tour. But before we get into it all, I want to thank today's sponsor, DistroKid. DistroKid is a music publishing service that I have been using far longer than this studio or this channel has ever existed. When I was publishing music with my old band and I was really kind of getting my feet wet as an amateur in the industry, DistroKid was the obvious choice. It was the most cost-effective, feature-rich option out there for somebody just getting started. And here we are today, well over a decade later, and I still use DistroKid. I still have an account with DistroKid. I still recommend them to everybody I know who is looking to publish music, whether it's their first album or their 10th album. I always recommend they take a look at DistroKid, and I recommend that you do too. You can use the link in my description down below for 7% off your first year with DistroKid, and it will help this channel out. It will help me afford to keep making videos like this, and it'll also help you get your music in front of everybody who wants to hear it. So thank you to DistroKid for sponsoring this video, and from my home studio to yours, I hope you're making great music and getting it out in front of your audience. So this is the main wall. This is most of the usable space in the room. For those of you who've been watching for a while, this window is where the desk used to be before I pivoted it 90 degrees underneath my wall of pedals. I have all of my amps stacked under this desk in front of this rack system behind it. And then on that, I have smaller amplifiers, my tape echo, my tube amp expander, my auxes, and all of that. This is 90% of the usable space in this room for the studio. And then directly to the right of my desk is the door out to the hallway, and then this wall, which is the closet where I keep guitars, the wall where I have double stacked the rest of my guitars, the closet where I also keep extra pedals, all my gig bags, and all of my cabling up on the thing up top. Here, you can see it better by me moving the light box that is never more than about 1.5 feet from my head in this room. So we've covered 3 walls in this room so far. You have main wall where the desk and the pedals are. To my right, you have the guitar wall. To my left, you have the window that I used to shoot in front of. And like I said, now we have the literal curtain I am going to pull back in my studio to reveal that this room is also my laundry room, complete with terrible fluorescent lighting. This is not a glamorous space. This is a space that I have made to work for what it is that I do. And look, there's a reason I wanted to show you the reality of this space before we did anything resembling a real studio tour. And that is, I understand that even to have a dedicated room like this, to have a room in your house that could just be for music production is a massive, massive point of privilege. I do not take lightly the fact that I have the kind of like opportunity to have a dedicated space to do this. But when I started this channel, it was fully setting up and fully tearing down in my living room every time I wanted to shoot. If you scroll back throughout this channel, you will find times where I was making all of my content from my kitchen, from a small desk in my living room, setting up and tearing down entirely on the couch in my living room. There have been a lot of iterations of this, and the channel sounding as good as it does, the mixes being as good as they are right now, is in some small part due to having the kind of space that I have now. Relatively inadequate as it is for trying to film and produce and everything else. But it is largely just that my space has kind of grown as I have developed as a musician. Most of the gear in my racks on my desk right now is relatively new. The vast majority of the stuff I have written and mixed and produced over the years was not made on the incredibly nice home setup I currently have. So I actually do want to very lightly talk through some of the gear, how I have it set up, and why I think that you don't really need what I have, but I think is really worthwhile to kind of have a roadmap to graduate up towards. So let's go ahead and talk about some of the actual gear in this space as well. So these are the beating heart of my studio at this point. The Apollo Twin X, the kind of like smaller recording interface out in front, has been with me for the last couple of years. And the 8XP is a relatively new addition to the studio. And while I will say that it is the single biggest upgrade I have made in years to my studio, it is not something that I would consider to be remotely essential for the home recorder unless you are really in a place of needing to level up pretty significantly. For years, I was using the Universal Audio Apollo Twin X that you see in front of you with that Behringer rack behind it. Now, I am not a big fan of Behringer as a company, and I don't think that the ADA 8200 rack right here is a particularly high quality piece of gear. I don't think the preamps sound that great, but here's the thing. It is cheap and it has optical out, and that allowed me to take it and my Apollo Twin and create a 10 input system for relatively cheap, which is exactly what I needed at the time. Honestly, the reason I upgraded to the X8P was I needed more DSP for the UA plugins, and the biggest thing for me was I needed more than 2 XLR inputs. I needed honestly more than 4 XLR inputs, while also being able to simultaneously run my Universal Audio aux via SPDIF into the back of my interface. And single SPDIF input was the kind of like linchpin limitation of the Apollo Twin for me needing to upgrade. Here's the thing though, is you don't have to spend that kind of money to get your home recording setup up to snuff. Before I had the Apollo Twin X, I had the Apollo Twin Mark I that I bought used on Reverb years after it had come out. The Apollo Twin X I think was already on the market, and I bought the Mark I on Reverb for really, really cheap just by kind of waiting and sniping one when the price kind of got really, really good. But before that, I was recording for years, for the lifetime of this channel, on a PreSonus recording interface that I probably bought on Craigslist for $35. You can go out and buy an interface with borderline pocket change these days and get something that sounds good enough to get started. And I think that's all that really matters. If you're not recording now, you could be recording later today for almost no money. And that is a hurdle that I think every single person needs to jump. as a natural stepping stone from that, my DAW is Universal Audio's Luna. It is my go-to DAW for basically all the work I do on this channel, as I think it's a kind of like Pro Tools but slimmed way down. It allows me to get great sounds and great arrangements together very, very quickly, although it does lack some kind of deeper professional level features that I'm hoping come in the future. As a result, I still have to kind of jump out to Logic or Pro Tools for the occasional scoring gig or anything that involves multi-out mixing for programs like Contact. But for what I do, Luna, being free for Universal Audio Apollo users, is an absolutely wonderful DAW. But if you don't have an Apollo unit and you don't have access to Luna as a free software, I started on GarageBand and it was great. And you can also get something like Audacity, which is another free DAW that will just get you started. From there, I think Logic is like $100 last I checked. Maybe it's 200, but I think that's a perpetual license at 200. So that's way better than like the month-over-month subscription that Pro Tools is these days. Okay, so a quick update. In between filming this video and publishing, there was actually an update. Universal Audio has now made Luna available as a free DAW for all Mac users, regardless of the interface you're using. So if you are interested in checking out Luna, you now can use it for free without having to buy into the UA hardware. So like I said, it's what I use. I recommend it, but there are still other great options for you if you want to go a different route. Here's the truth of the matter. Everything else is gravy, and I'm not being facetious here. I have some KRK Rocket 6s behind me as monitors. I don't really mix on them. This room is not treated. I use a SD1 or an SM7B microphone because they sound great in untreated rooms. I don't tend to mic amps in here because it's not a good room for it. I don't tend to mix on speakers in here because it's not a great room for it. I do basically all my mixing on these DT770s, which I think are under $200 new on Amazon. I use my KRKs so that I can monitor myself while I'm recording for a camera. And that is just purely so that I can easily line all my footage up for the video. All of my keys work, all of my strings, all of my arrangements, and all of my drums are all performed on a launch key MIDI piano, which again is a relatively cheap piece of gear, but they all also make cheaper keyboards as well. Like, none of this has to be expensive. None of this has to be gate kept in any real capacity. The drum libraries are affordable and sound great. My bass chain is a bunch of pedals that I really like, but for the vast majority of time, I was using Universal Audio's SVT plugin, and it sounds excellent. It sounds as good as the Origin bass rig, in my opinion. This is the thing though, is all you have to do is build your home recording setup to the specificity that you need. The nature of this channel, of the way that I write and produce for the internet these days, needs me to kind of be flexible in terms of sometimes I'm mic and amp, sometimes I'm using the aux or the tube amp expander, sometimes I am using a direct in rig with the UAFX amp in a box pedals, sometimes I am recording directly in to the high Z input on the recording interface so that I can use the Neural DSP amp rig plugins. But you probably don't need all of the options the same way that I do to be able to run things around here. If you are somebody who just needs to mic a single amp up, you can buy a single input recording interface. I would recommend buying something stereo so that you can grow with it a little bit. But if you're somebody who is just going to live in that kind of amp sim world, you have a Fractal or a Helix, all you need is that kind of cheap, affordable stereo in. Things like the Quad Cortex actually function as their own recording interface. You can USB the Quad Cortex to your laptop and use that as your interface for Pro Tools or Logic or whatever else. Like, your home setup is way more attainable than you might realize that it is. And this is a lot smaller than I try to make it look on this channel. And if I can do what I'm doing here, there's no reason you can't do exactly as well from wherever it is that you are. So I hope this is helpful. I hope this sheds some light both on kind of demystifying my workflow a little bit, but honestly, my real hope here is that it will kind of give you a little bit of a push to be recording more at home, write your own music, mix your own music. The only way you get better at it is by getting better at it. So until next time, thank you for watching.